Today, it's Edwin's Monday evening property rant. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Well, that is posts covering finance and property news. Monday again, Edwin again, and peak stupidity again, Edwin. Not from you, but from out there.
What's scary? What's scarier than Halloween, Martin? What's scarier than the ghosts and the gremlins and all the night creatures that come out in Halloween? I'd say politicians with a mandate to continue to crush the Aussie population.
Absolutely. Well, you put up this scary one, which I thought was very suitable around Halloween. Holy smokes! If I didn't witness it with my own eyes and ears, I would have called it BS. Bidder with no finance approval on hand encouraged to bid strong and hard, and they did. It's a good job that probably got passed in, or would they'd been up the creek without a paddle, wouldn't they?
Oh, it was a scary moment. And if we were to do a show just around this post and what happened, it would be really alarming. It would send alarm bells down the spine of many that are looking to get into the market and what's happening out there. It's an absolute travesty. It's an absolute shameful state of affairs of what we are seeing in some of the property markets. Look, the common thread, Martin, the interesting common thread is that the buyers in these particular markets, they are of a particular ethnicity, and obviously they are guided by those around them that really have no clue, and agents and agencies that are persuading them to do crazy things. So this is another factor where where you're in. Just imagine the Melbourne Cup, right, which is coming up tomorrow. Just imagine you're in the Melbourne Cup, and you're riding one of those fast fillies, and they're I mean, you've been training for 15 years, and you finally get to you get a number on the Melbourne Cup, and either side of you are two apprentice jockeys, right? That's what's happening. If I could use that analogy, that's what's happening out there in the marketplace, where you're surrounded by ignorance. I'm not saying that the jockeys aren't going to be employed just because they're apprentices. They're a lot better than most, but a lot of these punters that are in there and that are being pushed along by the selling agents to bid hard and bid strong, where they don't even have finance approvals. It is crazy, but this is what you're confronting. This is what many are confronting out on the field, and this is what you've got to be watchful and wary of. And hence, what we're going to talk a little bit more about this whole scenario and how you can protect yourself in the tips at the end of the show.
Well, it's really important, Edwin, because I do see a lot of people now being bounced into bad decisions, and we might touch on that a little later. But look, let's just relax, calm down just for a second, right? Now, I was reading the other day that just experiencing 20 minutes of being out in the countryside, in the green, is actually very powerful for people, right? And even actually looking at it on screen is equally powerful. Let's just calm down. This is my local area in the autumn. Look at this. Isn't it beautiful? And here's another one. And here's another one. It is lovely out there at the moment, right? So just relax, because da, 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 yes, we have a housing bubble. Right. What investors think a housing bubble looks like, blowing a big bubble, what a housing bubble actually looks like with the landmine under the waterline. That's actually quite a nice little summary, isn't it? And unfortunately, a lot of people are actually on the sort of the housing bubble. Oh, it's a balloon, I want to get in, I want to get in, I want to get in, I want to get in. But under the water, there's a little bit of worry, I think. And this is the problem. And unfortunately, a lot of people are actually making really bad decisions because they're being bounced into those bad decisions.
They've been bounced because of ignorance. They've been bounced because they really don't know what they're doing, and also, they're persuaded by ironically, their own family members, and again, I keep on saying by the selling agents that many got to understand and believe and know and come to terms that they are not on your side. And just because you can get a delayed settlement on the property does not mean that you're going to be able to fund the settlement. This is where people have got to be extra careful. Now, one of the posts after that on X that I posted up, one of the comments, after posting up the second the second conversation there, and what my opinion is as to what's happening in some of the suburbs, there was a comment made by another ex person, and they said that one of the family members had made an offer on a property above the 2 million from memory, and they did it without finance approval, and they are absolutely the proverbial pooping bricks because they may not get approved. Now, a lot of people have got to understand that uh, it's not so much that the property isn't worth what you're wanting to pay in terms of how the bank is going to look at the your approval. It's more on your, it's more, the balance is more on your serviceability and affordability, and whether or not the position that you hold at work or the type of work that you do is one of those positions that they can feel comfortable that you are going to service the loan for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So valuers are going out there, and now they are valuing property where in areas where there's too much emotion, and in some instances they're coming short. And that post that came after in the comments of when I posted my things on X there over the weekend was just further clarification and further the an accreditation of what is actually happening, what values are actually doing, and people are actually, as I said, they're on tender hooks whether or not they're going to prove, because they have maxed themselves out. So the question now is, Martin, is who do we blame? Who do we blame as to why we got here outside of the political spectrum? Who do we blame? And in my consecutive post, or the post that after, I put up some points.
Yeah, and I think you start this very importantly because other agents are pushing ignorant buyers into financial catastrophes. Many vendors are not coming to terms with reality. But as you say, we shouldn't be blaming the vendors, but the agents. The agents are in the middle of this, and you highlight there a number of things that they do to create a quote crisis, and unfortunately, prospective purchasers are getting a bit bounced as a result of all this.
Yeah, that's the game that a lot of agents, not all, but a lot of agents play, Martin, and this selling agents play, and this is the game that needs to be really, from the regulators to the main property groups and bodies that they're supposed to bring some sort of equilibrium, some sort of common sense into the industry, but they don't. This is what should be happening. That with a lot of the selling agents, unfortunately, it's a game to them. It is a game to them. Notwithstanding the fact on the other side of that transaction is a family that's going to get caught up and potentially is going to lose the 10% deposit because they won't be able to settle. But look, in a lot of instances, in a lot of markets, a lot of agents know that the vendor's expectations are way too high and the property is going to get passed in anyway. So they're going to do whatever it takes. And this is what they're playing the game. This is the dark side. This is the Halloween side. This is the scary side of the industry that I'm involved in. And this is what people have got to wake up and have got to come in, like you said, with calmness and cool and collected, because and this is why you and I are trying to be the torch, trying to be the light in the darkness that in the smoke and mirrors that is out there, because you've got games that have been played. Now, I knew I knew that the owner wasn't going to accept anything less than the higher amount, $300,000 above what the property actually got passed in that. You know, a number of us knew, my clients knew, because we had the discussions with the agent, we had other intel, and but there's that chance that what if this individual that wasn't able to obtain finance, what if the vendor said, "Oh, yeah, stuff it. Let's let it go. Yeah, yeah, sell it. Bang." And they're caught in they're the highest bidder, and they're caught in the transaction. I'm telling you, they, uh, from what we know, what we saw, what we heard, there is no way that they would have settled, and that probably would have been back on the market anyway. But outside of that, the agents know the game that's been played. They'll obviously use paid advertising in order to get the crowd there, because the strategy is not necessarily to sell the property at auction margin. That's not the strategy at the moment in many markets that have really hit the ceiling, price ceilings. The strategy is really to draw the crowd and then to have the ammunition to crunch the vendor way below what they told the vendor that they were going to achieve, that they were going to sell the property for them, because that is the strategy that many have adopted. Many in other words, they buy the listing, they play silly buggers with the marketing campaign, they get the crowd, and then they say, see, this is what, look at the crowd that we drew, and look at what happened, and you still want too high. And, because it's a way to almost dispel the fact that it was the agent in the first place that told them that they were going to get over $3 million for the property, and the vendor's expectations. Hey, so if you tell me you can get, you're the expert, right? You're the expert. Okay, I'll give you the listing, because that you are the expert in the area. You are the leading award-winning agent in the area. I'm going to give you the listing, so make it happen. So the only way to then bring them down, as they say, to in the vernacular, bring them down to reality, is to crunch them after the auction and say, see what happened? Look, it's not my fault. It's the market. It's the market. But all along, that was the strategy, and they're able to play these games because the vendors are signed up for 3 months. Their marketing campaigns usually, from launching the property to the auction, is 28 days. So they've still got, they've still got another 6 to 8 weeks up their sleeve, to crunch the vendor and force them to sell, and miraculously bring the buyers up a little bit more as well, and meet them. So, but at the end of the day, regardless, the vendor loses, the buyers are in precarious territory, but the agent, goes home, whistling, playing the pipe, and whatever else they play with, and then and they've got money in the back pocket, because they end up with a commission anyway.
Well, of course, that's it. They just want a transaction at any point, at any price, because, of course, they make money on a successful transaction, whether or not actually it's the right thing for the vendor or indeed the prospective purchaser. And it's interesting, Edwin, this last week I was chatting with some first-time buyers who'd saved up actually quite well over recent times and were really tickled with the opportunity they thought with the 5% deposit of getting into the market. And so we went through the pros and cons and all of those things, and we were looking at a particular area using my one-to-one service. And we started talking about cash flow. Now, not cash flow in terms of to buy, but in terms of to service. And interestingly, whilst they'd done some maths on what they could afford from a deposit perspective, they hadn't thought about servicing. So we started to look at this in some detail. And I brought to the table this worrying thought. Is the inflation dragon back sooner than expected? And this cartoon from Fiona actually really highlights it rather well. We were talking about interest rates, unemployment, and Trump, and AI, and global conflict. Now, the inflation dragon seems to be knocking on the door. We didn't expect to see you back so soon. And interestingly, as this one says from Brett, right? Oh, getting a bit breezy out there. Bang goes the November rate cut. And now people are talking about, well, maybe interest rates are not going to drop. The worrying thing is they could actually stay put for quite some period of time, or indeed, maybe even rise. And what I said to the particular people who I was working with in this one-on-one, do some scenarios. Work out what would happen if interest rates stuck where they are or went up, because they had assumed a drop of somewhere between 3/4 and 1% of interest rates within the next year. That was their base assumption that they'd actually put into their modeling when they thought about their situation. And in fact, I made a show called Surprise, Time to Forget About More Rate Cuts as the CPI jumps. Maybe that's the way to think about it. So look, the fact is that people are getting bounced into bad decisions simply because of the pressure from the agents, the pressure from the markets. And the other observation, Edwin, I don't know whether you see this too, that people are prepared to compromise on the quality of the property that they're thinking of buying. So they're beginning to pick up properties with more severe defects. Sometimes those defects are not fully understood. And so, as well as the cash flow pressure question, in other words, can I afford to make my mortgage repayments into the future, assuming unemployment doesn't, go through the roof, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other question is, what are you getting into? When you're picking up a property with defects, you're actually creating the risk of a Pandora's box, because defects cost, and defects cost over time. And again, a lot of people, whilst they've saved up for that deposit, and even if they've got a cash flow that may make them able to pay unless they get a nasty surprise, but if they get a nasty surprise, then all bets are off. And unfortunately, the net result of all this is a lot of people are making really bad decisions.
And they get, and quite a number of them find out about those bad decisions earlier on in the piece, because some of those defects in the properties are such that they've got to be addressed immediately or within the first 6 months, and that puts a lot of pressure. And then you start getting a lot of more, greater issues amongst the social landscape, because then there's strains on marriages and strains on family because of financial pressure. So I mean, in the circle keeps on going around, and the problems keep on getting worse. But I'll tell you what I believe is happening now, Martin, and that is that in a number of markets, what's happened is we've reached the ceiling, as I put in those posts over the weekend, in my observation over the last couple of weeks, in different markets across Sydney. Where we were noticing in some markets of properties above the $2.5 million, there was you could count the number of properties in one hand by the number of thumbs you had in that hand, as to how they really weren't appearing. You only had they were coming in dribs and drabs. But in some of these markets where the properties have reached that new ceiling, what we're now noticing is that there's a lot more properties on market now. Where we were noticing 2 or 3, now where you got 6 or 7 listings, and it's almost like spring has come in a little bit late in that price band. So what we're going to see there is obviously the ones that are trying to push that $3 million barrier and create a new ceiling. They're going to stay there for a little bit longer, and others that are going to obviously follow suit, because the others have been sales have been close to the 3 million. Then there's a big drive by the selling agents in those areas to say, look, you got less, the market's hot, the market is in high demand. So what's happened is where you had 2 or 3 listings in these markets, because the locals are starting to believe the rhetoric that the agents are pushing. See, you need to put your property on the market because they're fetching great price. So that by nature is now put a ceiling, or the market's going sideways as it continues to go up, because now you've got a lot more properties on the market, supply and demand is a wonderful thing. So now you've got more properties being supplied into those markets. So it's not until those lower band properties in those areas or adjoining suburbs in those areas start pushing higher. In other words, the tide starts lifting those markets, that these other ones that are in your band, your $2.5 to $3 million band, they're not going to breach that $3 million. So it's going to take a bit of time. But in the meantime, people just, as you said earlier on, people just got to take a step back, take a deep breath, because in that band, in that $2.5 to $3 million band in many markets of Sydney, there's a lot more properties coming on, and it's because of the push. It's the agents themselves create these shortages and dumps, right? Because they go out and start obviously trying to get listings. They get excited themselves, and then they talk to all the previous contacts to try and get them to come on the market. So, and it's going to be a bit hard. Obviously, it becomes a little bit harder in these areas to break those new ceilings. I'm not saying that they won't be broken. If the government continues to do what the continue to go down the path of the crazy policies that they've been going down, they will eventually break those ceilings. But for now, many markets in that bandwidth of the 2.5 to 3 million are going to be going sideways for a little bit, because we're starting to notice more properties come on the market. And as you said, these are also where you've got to be very careful and sift through the ones that have a lot of issues. They get caught up and they get too excited because of the numbers that are on market, because they're all going to be, at first they're going to be demanding a lot more than what they're worth, and they're trying to, push people into bad decisions. And the selling side of the industry will try to coerce buyers into making earlier decisions prior to auction, creating the ways of creating the illusion of urgency, so that they can be sold prior, and those properties that have got major issues will get taken out. So at the end of the day, what we're saying is, just take a deep breath and get there a little bit earlier, have a good look. But obviously, the due diligence needs to be very. You need to be careful about the due diligence before you participate on the day, anyway.
Absolutely. Well, I remind everybody of that lovely green scene at the stop of the show. Just relax. Just take your time. Don't get bounced into things. But of course, the media is continuing to push the story as well. Home prices jumped 6%, and Melbourne outstrips Sydney, says the Financial Review. Capital city dwelling values have risen by $53,100 or 5.9% this year, and most of the growth has been in the lower and middle segments of the market, where higher prices put more pressure on first home buyers. Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And of course, we'll talk about Catalan in a second. Just to say that the auction results, just remember, of course, that Melbourne, the Cup and everything, and the holidays, what have you, are messing with the numbers there. But it's interesting that the clearance rates were really not that flash, according to Domain, relative to perhaps last week. And again, they obviously have talked about the number reported rather than the number actually sold. Nevertheless, the prices are up. Sydney up 0.7% over the last month. Melbourne up 0.9%. But interestingly, of course, Melbourne is still lagging over the quarter and over the year. And if you look at the Catality data, which just gives you the complete view, you can see that the median value in Sydney, 1.256 million, 818,000 in Melbourne. Brisbane continues to be above Melbourne and above Perth. Perth, of course, is still very strong, 1.9%. And the regional areas are up 1% too. So it is, unfortunately, not really a good news story, particularly for people getting in. And as you said, you posted on this, the madness continues, and government incentives, bribes played a bigger part last month. Once the dust settles, it will actually be worse for many trying to get into the market to secure a forever home. Absolutely. But I think we should also make the point, Edwin, that the growth in investment property purchases continues to rise. This is actually from the private sector data from the ABS. And investors, of course, if you look there, are borrowing in terms of overall growth. This is the stock of loans, more than owner occupiers. And in fact, in that AFR article, Louis Christopher said he expected clearance to soften to lead up to Christmas. It'll spiral away. But the clearance rates were significantly up with corresponding periods last year. We'll talk about that in a second. With more buyers soaking up increased volumes, first home buyers being brought into the market with the home buyer scheme. And then, of course, the articles come back saying how Anthony Albanese's first home buyer scheme has backfired as prices soared at the fastest rate in 2 years. And, they're blaming that. And it's interesting, there was an article here from the ABC that Australians are being priced out of the property market and first home buyer schemes may not be helping. And in fact, Hull Posson here, who I've done work with in the past, makes the point that successive governments have tried to help first home buyers with these first home buyer assistance schemes. The general impact of those is to make inflation worse rather than moderating it. And of course, it stokes home prices. And then you catch stuff like this. Our grandparents built houses with one wage. We can't even rent on two. So, the whole market is wrecked as a result of poor government policy over the long period of time. And I just want to highlight two other quick things, Edwin, before I come back to you. The first is the latest jobs ad dropped in October. It fell 2.2%, which is interesting because, of course, the other side of the equation with what the RBA is worrying about is jobs. And the RBA said that jobs wasn't actually particularly much of a problem. But this is actually the other side of the equation, which people may not be aware. Because of the significant increase in home loan pre-approvals, particularly from first home buyers, stimulated by the first home buyer scheme, guess what? The banks are struggling to meet the demand. So effectively, it's getting much more difficult to get approvals. And, the whole processing of loan applications have stalled. And I've spoken to a couple of first time buyers this last week who've been caught because the bank's unable to do what they need to do, despite the fact that the major banks are on track for $30 billion in profits as lending ramps up. So the banks are doing very well, thank you, thanks to the government. The government, of course, is saying, well, we sell prices will go up, but ordinary people are being caught in the crossfire. So it's tough to get a loan approved. It's tough if you're a first-time buyer to be able to afford to get into the market unless you buy something which is compromised. And yet the agents are pumping. And so you can see how this whole structure is effectively being distorted because of that government policy at the start of the game. And I remind everybody, Labour did say before they got back in that they did expect to see home prices rise, and well, they were right on that, but the consequences, they're disastrous.
So look, it's unfortunately, and we can go around and around, and we're just going to go around in circles, and we're not going to be able to change anything,
Yes.
Other than change our pants because it's going to give us the shits. Talking about the bad policies that the governments have made over the last few decades. Look, there's another contingency that our followers and the viewers need to be made aware of, and that is today I received two mandates or two briefs from investors that are changing their class. When what they want to do now is what they're looking at, and this says a lot on our side of the equation. This is a lot about where we are in the market and how it's going to. Many believe it's going to sort of progress moving forward. Is when you start getting people moving their different asset classes, different investment classes back into property, that the brief that received today was to look for properties that they could buy, renovate, and put back on the market within 6 months. So that what does that tell you? And these are people that have already got portfolios of, one has 10 or 12, the other one's got about 15. So it's and they have been investing elsewhere in other in other asset classes, but now they feel a little bit a bit concerned, into what's happening in those sectors, and they're basically saying, right, we're going back into property. Hence the reason why you've got your investor, the stats on investors coming in, and because they for a while now, you and I have been saying that they are your main competitors to the first home buyers, because investors aren't buying the $3 million, $4 million homes to get a rental return on. That's a different type of investor altogether. They're the ones that just want to park money that they can't keep overseas in the country of origin because the government will take it from them. The investors, the local investors, are more interested in your before it was your bandwidth from your 750 to 800. Now, because of all these incentives and grants and everything else, now it's pushed those bands to your to around your milling range, and that's what they're after. And these are the markets traditionally where your first home buyers would first climb on the ladder, then to move further inland. But first home buyers are now competing for these markets in Mount Druitt's close to 1 million now. Doonside's now the median there in Doonside, Layla Park is 1 million. Layla Park of all places now, it's hit the million as a median. You've got areas such as Kings Park. You can't touch a property in Kings Park in the school catchment area there for less than 1.3, 1.32, 1.33, where 6 months ago you could buy them for 1.15 or even less, 1.1. So these are the headwinds that are against the Aussie battlers that are just trying to buy a forever home, that they can take a deep breath and basically bring up the kids and put them in the local sporting clubs and local schools, and and live happily ever after. But now, as many are saying, it's even hard to find the residential property for rent, other than dog boxes and properties that aren't well looked after, let alone to get into the market by way of have a affordable housing roof over their head without too much concern of being able to put food on the table, or have those luxuries of being able to put the kids in weekend sports and every other thing that we used to take for granted. But this is where we are. But the unfortunate thing, Martin, and the sad part of all this is that it's not going to get better anytime soon. I know I may sound very negative, but what I see there is out on the ground is the fact that it's not broken yet. From 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, so when it does break, that's when the revolution kicks in.
Yeah, well, I think, and look, I've spoken to quite a few people over the last little while who say, I don't like the game, but it is the game that is being served up thanks to government policy. I've got to try and make decisions within that context. I can't just wait for the game to change, because it may not change. And so I've got to make the best possible decision that I can make at this point in the cycle. And I think that's exactly the way to think about it. It doesn't mean it's the best necessarily, but it's the best in this particular situation. Oh, and by the way, did you see this data? This was really interesting. That the capital gains and rental deductions in negative gearing benefits the most wealthy dramatically. This is from the Australian Institute. You can see there that the highest income deciles got the massive amount of most gains. And they also make the point that house prices really started to accelerate relative to disposable income when the capital gains discounts began. So there is an interesting structural question here about whether, in fact, that again, more government policy wrecked the joint. But I want to make the point more broadly, and this is actually, I think, just worth reflecting on. Interesting and important discussion here. The M3, this is the total amount of money liquidity in the system, has gone up dramatically, 87.4% between December 2015 and August 2025, right? And the value, of course, has reflected significant rises in home prices too. So the liquidity question here, the liquidity question is part of it. And again, this is policy. This is actually the government. This is actually deliberate. So, you know, negative negative gains tax and other tax breaks, and the liquidity, so printing more money and all the money supply stuff. I mean, that again, those are policies. So my point is, you know, you can't fight those. That is fact. That is the context for making decisions. So if you're an individual prospective purchaser, you've got to try and do the best you can inside a situation that is looking actually pretty shaky from a policy perspective. Oh, and by the way, if you want to go pretty shaky, let me just make the point that, of course, the big techs are actually throwing huge amounts of capex globally into investments that may not return. And we're also seeing significant worries in the US with the repo rate going through the roof, and the reverse repurchase agreements are also up, which are signs of significant instability in the global financial system. Again, when people are making decisions, you know, that may sound not directly connected to what people are wanting to do, but it's just worth reflecting on the global instability. But again, if you are actually a prospective purchaser now, and you hear all of these, worries about there, you've almost got to say, well, yeah, I hear all that, but I've still got to make decisions. Yeah, I've got a life to make. I've got kids to bring up. I want to get my household into something which is actually sustainable for the long term. And so you're caught in this sort of really, really, really complicated situation. And what I find when I talk to people is that they go around in circles on this. And depending on your attitude, some will say, "Well, I'm not going to do anything then because it's way, way too uncertain, and things just may go off the rails." To which I reply, "Just relax, just enjoy the scenery, just careful, careful, careful. Now, let's think about your own situation. Let's think about your own circumstances, and let's find a way through." Because the problem is, if you get caught in this sort of wave of, the government did it, and the international situation is going to blow up, all of those things, sometimes you end up just being in a spiral of negativity and doesn't actually solve the real critical issue, which is, where am I going to live?
100%. This is where, look, and this is why we do what we do with a lot of our clients, and we walk through the different scenarios, we walk through the different minefields. We help them to walk through the different minefields as well, because it is a minefield out there, and this is where look, the price on the day is the price on the day, but you don't need to be paying 5%, 10%, 15% over the odds, because you ended up getting caught in the emotional slipstream of other bidders on the day. This is what we're there for. This is why I say to most of our clients, my job is to take away. One of my roles is to take away the emotion away from the transaction as much as possible. We're not going to achieve 100% reduction in emotion, because you still have to have that emotional context to the purchase of a property. You've got to feel when you step into the place. You got to feel like that. It is a place that you can make. You can make it a home. You've got to feel there's that element of, there's that sensory element of feeling good about being in the place. You feel right. You feel the vibe. You feel some sort of a connection. Like in some places, you just walk in and you walk out because you say, "Shit, whatever happened in there, I don't want to know about it, and I don't want to be part of it in the future either." I mean, that's it does. It has happened. But this is what we're here for, Martin, and this is why I put out our Ashfield chat that we did a couple of weeks ago. I put it out on LinkedIn to suggest to people that are looking at even internationally, because we're now connected globally. That they want to they want to understand, from a granular perspective, what is happening in an area. Although it was very quick synopsis of what we did about Asheville, and I'm sure you do a deeper dive in many areas where people are looking behind. That is critical. That is crucial. That is something that you can't get away from from investing in anymore. And look, and I say in many cases, you can't get away from using our services either when you're either making a one-off transaction with us or whether we're going to take you by the hand through the from the beginning to the end, and that journey could take a week, a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. In some cases, with some clients, it's taken them 12 months to buy it because until we finally, we find and we walk through and we feel comfortable with, and our client feels comfortable in signing on the dotted line. But the unfortunate thing is that the industry itself does not make it any easier for you to navigate and navigate through those minefields, because that's what they are, Mark. They're minefields. Just because they give you a building and pest report for $45 or $65, they're not helping you. They're hindering. They're adding, they're fueling your emotion. They're taking away, they're chipping away at that safety barrier that you have, that sense of safety, because you think, oh, hold on a minute, but I've got a building and pest report, and it says it's all okay. And this is where you end up paying more than what you should. This is why I say, that we don't need to pay, over the odds. Most of the time, for our team previously and our new team that we're building, I inspect the properties at the end of that, and if it doesn't pass my sniff test, we don't go to the next stage. And if the vendor's agent and if the vendor doesn't want to negotiate on what we find, not what their building and pest report says, but what we identify ourselves, and also further afield, what our arm's length inspectors identify as well when they crawl right through underneath the properties and crawl through the roof spaces and give us a more comprehensive understanding of what's going on. If they're not prepared to negotiate, well, we just tell them to get stuffed, and then we move on to the next one, unless unless people get so caught up that they need to buy. But at least even then, we're not persuaded by emotion, but rather by logic. We're not persuaded by the selling agent, but rather by what the facts that we have before us. And that's the where we started the show, Martin, is where somehow our audience, yourself, myself, and all our followers, we need to get that voice out there and need to tell the people, hey, the selling agent is not on your side. And just because they tell you to bid high and bid fast and bid strong, you don't have to follow their, that's contrary to what we should be doing in the first place. The first rule of property transaction is you start very low. That's the first rule. And then we move on from there. So this is the message that we got to get out there. But people think that ChatGPT or this other AIs and everything is going to make it easier to understand. There are certain things that ChatGPT won't tell you. You won't get under the house. You won't get in the roof space. You won't identify issues. You won't identify a lot of things that unless you know what you're looking for, you're only going to find the same information that the agent's already given you anyway.
Spot on, Edwin. This is a really important point that you're making here, and I think that unfortunately a lot of people have been caught up in the in all of the media spray and all of the stuff from the property portals and all of the averaging data that doesn't tell you the truth. So, we just chill out, folks. Take it one step at a time. And there are still deals to be done, and those deals are actually on the table potentially if you know how to go about it. And that, of course, is where this conversation can help. Now, we're just going to move on a little bit because there's a section, let's call it stories that make you go, yeah. And here's the first one that I've got, and then you've got some too, Edmund. This was actually amazing. So councils are now considering reducing the car parking requirements for new apartment developments across Sydney's east because they can't go down to make the big basements because of the sinkholes and the cracks that have appeared because of the low-lying land. Basically, the excavations are not possible because of the geotech structures. And of course, we've had a lot of issues with flooding and also with sinkholes in the area. So the answer is, well, you're not going to be able to find anywhere to park. I thought that was quite an interesting little observation on things. Let's change the rules and let's reduce the need to actually provide parking spaces. Now, question: if you're in an apartment and you don't have a car parking space, where do you go? Do you park on the street? Well, that's going to be really good, isn't it? A few hundred extra cars parked down the street, or what do you do? I mean, this is remarkable. Seriously, but that's what they're suggesting.
Well, this is a push. This is the push that's been going on for a while, and in Parramatta changed the requirements, close to 10 years ago, for parking, for parking spaces. And in many areas, if it's a one-bedroom apartment, you don't need a car parking space anymore. And in some cases, they want to push to some two-bedroom apartments as well, or a combination of or a percentage of two-bedroom apartments. So they're banking on the fact that public transport is going to take people here, there, and everywhere, and public transport is absolute crap in Sydney and Melbourne or Brisbane. I don't really catch anything there or know about it, but you can't. We're not in areas that we haven't developed a public transport system to cater for the needs and the requirements of many people. So you find that in a lot of the built-up areas, try to find parking, even though the apartments have got parking spaces. A lot of units will have two cars for the occupants. A lot of homes in the surrounding suburbs will have 3 or 4 cars, because little Johnny and little Mary, they don't catch the bus to school anymore. They drive as soon as they can get the P's, and mum has to have her sports car to go to the mum's meetings during the week. And Dad has to have, apart from his company car, he has to have his sports car because could be having a midlife crisis. So he has to let the top down and get a red Corvette and run around Penania. Just one of those things, right? So whatever tickles your fancy. But you find that we're a society that we're not used to commuting, because the simple fact is that as much as the governments and the local governments and the state governments and federal governments have pushed for public transport, they've never really cut the mustard. They've never really they talk about it, but they never really do anything substantive. You have a breakdown on the mountains line, and that's it. It's all over Red Rover. Forget about going to work. You're stuck. I'm just thinking, where do you park? Like I said, where do you park? And then comes the next big thing, Martin, and that is what you and I have been talking about for over 12 months, or almost 18 months now, and that is the push for the EVs and the push for the BYDs, the burn your dreams and everything else. Who's going to cater for those? Where are you going to charge those? How are you going to charge those if there's no parking? If there aren't any parking bays? So it's, my prediction is that in 10 years' time, we're going to see horse and carriages down Parramatta Road again, around Parramatta CBD. Well, that's what that's what Harris Park was all built on, horse and carriage transportation. I mean, who knows? Maybe by then, hey, we won't need the roads, because we'll be parking our hovermobiles on the balcony, so we won't really need. Bring on the Jetsons.
Well, indeed, yes. So that we're going to get really good roses, I guess. Now, on the hum storyline, okay, you threw this one up, which I thought was quite interesting, about a young Aussie homeowner who's revealed the drastic action she plans to take after getting a brutal interest rate shock. This got quite a lot of coverage.
Look, it is rather interesting, right? But it's just one of those things that at the end of the day, it's not her first rodeo. this is that's the first thing. It's not a first rate day, so it's something that you go in there with you go into a transaction with eyes wide open, and there's a lot that's said in that article. There's a lot that's not said, but what is said, what we take into account is the fact that it's a second property, and then when you start talking about lifestyle and selling, and well, one of the comments that was made, whether I read right or wrong, in that article was that although she wants to be an instrumental in crashing the property market, busting the bubble, she still wants to get her money back. But that's not how it works. If you really want to bring the value down of the properties in that complex, hey, sell yours for a loss and set the bar. But then that's only one. That the values will or agents will say that, hey, that's an out of line sale, so you really need a second second transaction in order to establish a better leading indicators as to where property prices are going in there. But look, all I can say, Martin, is that Dusty tells me that if she does sell, if she does eventually sell, and it's published that she does sell, this is what Dusty tells me. I could be wrong, but Parapower says that he's going to sell his apartment in Wenty as well and follow suit in solidarity, to bring the property market down. Whether that's what just Dusty tells you, right?
Yeah. So the whole point there was that if you do actually put your property on the market at the lower level, does that necessarily have an impact? Well, may not move the dial unless you can get to a number of people. But interestingly, I did see in a couple of suburbs where I've been looking recently, more people are actually now getting to the point of thinking that, I'm going to have to sell. So in fact, in some of those situations where multiple properties are coming back on the market at a lower level because of the financial pressures of living in that area, and I'm talking here about Western Sydney in particular, where the costs of the tolls and the costs of getting about and the infrastructure costs are really biting now. It can have a bit of an impact, but it's
It will.
a low, long road to be able to see prices coming down, particularly as we were saying with such high demand.
But the thing is, Martin, the demand is such that if you put any property, and this is what we talked about even in early last year, we're talking about the properties that were underwater and they were under pressure by banks of distressed property, because it's a long journey between being distressed to actually to mortgagee in possession, and even the ones that were being put up on quite a number of social media platforms, hey, they got sold for a lot more than what they got bought for because of the demand. So apartments in certain parts of Sydney will be very, very interesting if they set a precedent. And in an apartment complex, it would have to be at least two or three to start setting a precedent, and then there could potentially be a panic. But that's only going to happen if you get a mass number of properties. But because of the rental pressures as well, it's really what's keeping things because of because even Harry himself is tap dancing away because of the population increase has created a huge windfall for him in his property portfolio across the rental sphere of his portfolio, and it's a huge win. So he's saying, keep on bringing in the the population, because it's only going to be fattening his wallet, and he may have had a lower amount of sales across 2024, 2025, but in terms of rental, he's raking it in.
Absolutely. And it is interesting, isn't it, that some of the rental stories, you hear it from the point of view of the people who are trying to pay those rents, but some of the investors, particularly some of the larger institutional investors, and as you say, like Harry, have done really well out of this because effectively the rental streams have got quite a lot stronger. Unfortunately, ordinary people are perhaps not in such a fortuitous position, and I still see a lot of investors, particularly single property owner investors, who are struggling because they can't put the rent up anymore because they can't, their tenants are actually unable to pay more. And so when they do the math, they're still underwater from a cash flow perspective. So it's a bit of a mess, really. And talking about a mess, just before we get into the latest numbers, this was quite significant. I think the Housing Australia Future Fund faces an audit. This is the idea of you throw 10 billion then and you actually create money from the investment, and then you put that money into housing. But now they're worrying about whether, in fact, they're going to deliver the 40,000 social and affordable homes, and probably not. The Treasury's effectiveness in delivering and designing the Housing Australia Future Fund will also be probed by the Australian National Audit Office. About time too, in my view, Edwin. This was always a bit of a weird thing to do, particularly from a Labor government, and it's been poorly managed. It's not really very effective in terms of tackling the critical issues that we touch on every week. And I would suggest it could be part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So the audit is important.
Yeah, look, audit's important, just as important as the think tanks and every other tank that got that's been created in order to look after that fund, right? So that's where all the profits have gone to. All the profits have gone to think tanks and focus groups. And listen, when you start talking about $1 million in building an apartment, where the commercial price point is around about 600,000, and start talking about $1 million plus. Well, you really do need an audit, and then there's everything else involved. Yeah, and yeah, let's not talk about the union. Let's not talk about unions and everything else. And I told you, man, let's not talk about it because we'll get deplatformed.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, look, it's all the focus, as I said, it's all the focus groups, think tanks, and everything else. And yeah, of course, you're not going to have the money, but what is that order going to find other than what we already know, and what are they going to do about it is the real question, which is I think we've already got the answer, which is nothing, and things will move on and on to next.
Yeah, well, let me just say, here's the other next, right? The bridging visa holders in Australia, you can see there the significant rise. And interestingly, the rise of bridging visas from the Indian subcontinent is the most significant increase from 2025 compared with 2019, which I think is quite significant. And you and I have been talking about this for some time, the Another Silent Tigers and all of those things. Well, here's another data point that just confirms that this is a big deal. And, unless the audit is going to talk about migration, I don't think it'll do much at all. And of course, they won't want to touch migration, will they? No, no, no.
Well, the thing is, Martin. Look, the thing is, when I went away to the conference with a week and a half ago, when I was at the conference, and when Charles Savvy put up a slide on the screen, and yeah, he bought something, and I'll post that slide. I'll post that screenshot on when you post the rant on X. I'll follow it with that post, and it's something along the lines. There's close, just a bit over 8 billion people in the world, right? And 4 billion of them live within an 8-hour flight to Australia, and 1.4, and or just a bit over 1.4 are Indian. So, and at the end, then that is really telling. This is where I say is that we've got to be, we've really got to be sober as to the decisions that we're going to make, that people, our politics are going to make moving forward.
Mm.
And in the property decisions, whether it's long-term leases or short-term leases, or or moving to to climb onto the ladder, because you need to be sober in order to make these decisions. When you start looking at those numbers and those statistics and comparing, and no matter how many marches we have, no matter how many demonstrations we have, no matter how many flag days we have, government policy is government policy. You and I aren't going to stop that. But what we can do is, you secure our what we maybe foolishly think is is a plot of land, or find a means to bring sanity into your world. In some cases, hey, it could be relocating into other towns, or looking other areas, depending on what you're after and what's going to make your life sustainable in the future. So that's what's around us. They're the things that are around us. But understanding these points and understanding these facts will help our followers and our viewers to make more informed and better decisions. Moving forward, what one would think and one would hope.
Well, that's what this is all about. Let's just look at the numbers briefly. So in Sydney, on the 3rd of November, 24,140. If you go back a week, on the 27th, 23,714. So you can see there's been quite a significant uplift in terms of the listings in the Sydney region. And in fact, this chart shows it quite nicely. So we are seeing a continued rise. And if you compare 2015 with 2014 and 2013, listings are still higher, Edwin, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, look, 23, 24, and 25 is very interesting. But what's masking the 25 numbers, as I say over and over again, is the extra 1,600 or so land envelopes that got put on the market. So if you took those away, we would actually be tracking just as close to 2024 numbers this time last year than what if you took the home and land packages or the land envelopes away. From the numbers, but more importantly is we've got greater demand now than what we had in 2024, because in 2024, 2023, 2024, the silent tigers were just sitting dormant. They were sitting dormant, watching, renting to see where they were eventually going to move in. And that is why at the beginning of this year, I put on my Twitter handle and on my avatar there on X, I put there 2025, the year the silent tigers roar, because of the conversations, because of the clientele base that we have, and the many groups that we were assisting in between 2023 and 2024, and also the number of inquiry that we've been receiving from the silent tigers to assist them with in finding principal places of residence, because of the fact that they were sitting in rental properties, watching and scoping out the land. And things are only going to get, and this is how I talk about the clash between the silent tigers and the WeChat chatterers over in the North Rocks, because traditionally that wasn't a silent tiger area, but for as the silent tiger moved up that corridor, from the northwest region, moved up, and then also the younger WeChat chatterers were getting priced out of their favourite areas around your Eastwoods, Eppings, Carlingfords, and that, and then the North Rocks area became a battleground. But I say it in jest. I use these metaphors. I use these now just to sort of, because it is a battleground out there, and on Saturdays when you see people, I've even seen them in Winston Hills, or literally looking at each other a metre apart, eyeball to eyeball, calling the shots, calling the bids, and I think, shit, anytime soon one of them is going to pull out a flip knife.
Well,
crazy stuff that's been going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's look at the Melbourne numbers just briefly. So on the 27th, 28,077 properties listed. according to Domain, based on their definition of the Melbourne region. And a week later, 28,957 on the 3rd. So a bit of a rise and pretty much across the board there. If you look at Brisbane, 3,383 on the 27th, 3,330 a week later. So Brisbane's going in the other direction, which, Brisbane continues to zig whilst others may zag. And looking at the auction numbers, look, this is a much more interesting observation in terms of, well, it does look potentially as though the auction story is going to be one of more properties being passed in.
Yeah, more properties are being passed in. More, you can see that even on the figures that Domain put out. They can't mask what's happening out there. What we're seeing is a lot more properties being passed in than we bought at auction. A lot of properties are actually having a second go at auctions. They'll postpone the first auction and then push it forward another week or 2 weeks because of, as I said earlier on, is many areas have reached a ceiling, and it's going to take a lot to break those ceilings, in price bands between the 2.5 to 3 million in those markets. And those markets are traditionally where auctions are prominent, and as opposed to your private treaty sales elsewhere. So what we are seeing, though, is also from Dusty's auction numbers, comparison between 2024 and 2025, is we're almost on par now with 2025. It would seem that a late spring cut has come on into the Sydney auction numbers, but I don't believe, Martin, that it's so much a desire. Okay, it's a desire for vendors to achieve a higher price, but there's a lot of properties that are being passed in and they're not achieving it. So it's this strive and it's this push by the selling agents to promote auction and to achieve a high price. But if what I've seen over the last couple of weeks and what my colleagues tell me is that if vendors aren't getting what they've been told that they would get, they're passing them in. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts happening in different markets of Sydney around auctions. Obviously, it's a great opportunity that many are using as well to get rid of the ones that have a lot of issues, and many are falling for those traps as well. But that's a game that's been played out there, and people have got to be cautious of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So be cautious and be careful and do your due diligence. We keep saying, repeat the message ad infinitum because it's so critical. Let's look at the rentals briefly. In Sydney, on the 13th, there were 10,042. On the 27th, there were 9,885. So drop. In Melbourne, on the 13th, 11,767. And on the 27th, 11,656. So interesting times in the rental sector, Edwin, unfortunately, at the moment.
Yeah, they're last week's figures. My mistake. Didn't update it with this week's figures, but look, the trend is similar. The numbers aren't climbing. Because people are choosing to get rid of the properties in Melbourne, they're choosing to sell than to keep because of the government policies around the rentals, the issues there that are only escalating, and investors just feel more feel fearful that they'll never recover, so they prefer to keep them on the sales ledger than on the rental. Hence the reason why there's pressure there and rent's still going up, and we're not seeing the relief there because the investors are choosing to sell rather than put them back onto the rental arena. In Sydney, we've had a lot of completions in terms of complexes, apartments, medium density developments all around Sydney, but yet the numbers, they're similar. This week's numbers are similar to last week's numbers. we're still very low. I mean, these are numbers that we once saw in the Blacktown, Parramatta LGAs combined, let alone all of Sydney. This is crazy because again, people are opting to. They don't want to sell. They don't want to, and nothing's being really built. And there's a lot of migration coming to Sydney first. There's a lot of talk now on across different mainstream and social media as well that the what you and I've been saying for a while is what was going to happen, what was happening, and it's only just been picked up now, is that the Melbournians are leaving, packing up and getting out. And where do you go? Your first stop is Sydney before you move on to up to the retirement village of the Queensland. So, but this is where they mainly hang out in, and hence the reason why there's a lot of pressure. Although we have had a lot of completions, Martin, around Sydney. There's a lot of apartment complexes, medium density developments have been completed of late. Talking to my contacts in the property management arena, but they get absorbed fairly quickly.
Absolutely, and the supply of rental property is still pretty low. If you look at it, compared with what it used to be a few years ago, and unfortunately, rental rises are still very much on the cards for many people in existing properties. So finally, as we come to the end of the show, just coming back to the auction story, I think, and well, it's about being prepared, isn't it?
Yeah, look, it is. It's something that we've shared before a number of times, but it's prudent that we share it again, and that is really don't get sucker punched at an auction. In other words, don't get don't in order for you not to get sucker punched, in order for you to be able to stand when all the dust settles, be standing when the dust settles, is to be there early. Have a see and have a look and see. Who's registering, who your competition are, and because otherwise you will get sucker punched out there, because you'll one, you could be bidding against yourself. Two, you've got a better chance to understand whether or not it's an NCB, a non-committed buyer. In other words, a dummy bidder that you're bidding against. If it's somebody you're bidding against, somebody on the phone, play it cool, play it calmly. Let them hold the bid, especially if the property isn't called on the market. Many auctioneers, telling all this crap about, oh, we're not going to call it on the market, this and that. So they can't help themselves. They can't help themselves. But more importantly is be early and see, hang around the registration table, see who registers, to get a better understanding who you're going to bid against. I mean, there's a lot of things that we adopt, that we put at play. Dusty usually walks around the crowd, hearing and understanding what people are saying, what they're not saying, what they, and we pick up intel from 10 minutes before the open house inspection. We're already sitting down the road watching the body language of the agents, we're watching everything. There's a lot of play, but one of the important things is be early, don't turn up late, don't register late, get to know who you're at least get to know the faces of who's going to be bidding against you, and you get a fairly good idea from that as to which way you're going to go.
And I will add, Edwin, if you see builders who even sometimes turn up in the in their construction vehicle, you think, okay, so somebody might be here not just thinking about this as buying a property to live in, but maybe to develop it. And if you're competing as a purchaser for a property to live in with somebody who's thinking about it completely differently in terms of I can knock it down and subdivide or whatever, their economic model will be totally different. So it's just worth understanding if you've got some of those in the crowd as well, because it may well be that they will move the dial on the price in a direction that you probably shouldn't be following.
100%. And this is where obviously one of the other very important key elements of when you go into auction is you've got to set your price not on the day. Try to set it the day before and put it in an envelope and put it in the back pocket. Don't open it. That's otherwise you will get sucked into that vacuum, into that slipstream of the emotion. If you're not preparedness means you've got to go in with the number that your limit. Okay, even if it's on the morning, but not whilst you're standing there with everybody else, when not when the auction is called. You've got to have that preset number in your back pocket in writing, before the auction starts.
Absolutely. And just keep the lovely green scene in the back of your mind. Just relax, just take it easy. Don't get caught up in the emotion, and know your limits. Very important points, Edwin. Thank you very much. Lovely conversation today. Very important conversation as always. I look forward to doing it all again next week. Have a good week.